issues. You know, the positive thing here is that we do have lots of space to work with. We can slope those banks back to a 2-to-1 or whatever a stable slope is for the type of soils that you have out there. We can put toe rock if we need to go a little bit higher, depending on, you know, velocities in the stream, where that normal high water is, where our floodplain is on that other side there. We can do that in most of these situations where things are very open. A lot of times I feel like our farmers do like the hard engineering. I think they like to see something that they can see there. Feel free to jump in, Greg, or whoever, if you have other things to say about that.
Amy, does the same property owner own the other side of the stream there?
You know, in most cases, I feel like they do. And that obviously gives us more wiggle room to do some work.
That, and I notice it looks like you've got a bunch of willow trees starting to grow over there. So, you know, a little bit of maintenance on that other bank, you know, could, in high water events, those willows are going to catch trash and you're just pushing more flow against the bank that's eroding, right? So I don't know whether that's, you know, a real, it's not an answer that fixes the problem, but it would help prevent making it worse if you maintained capacity in that floodplain. You know what I mean?
Yes. And a lot of times those low banks do tend to be wooded areas or whatnot too. And if you go to the next one, Alyssa, I know we're going to have several here that are somewhat similar, just because this is the situation I feel like we see over and over again. Same difference here. We're in a farm field. We do have somewhat of a buffer strip that is getting eroded away. You know, you can see that a lot of our buffer strip there looks like it's now at the toe of our stream. This case is a little different than that last picture, as you can see that we have a lot of gravel that has deposited on the other slope. You know, and I know our regulating people didn't talk a lot about this last week, but we can remove some of that even without permits. I know there is a threshold that does kick you in to the permit process when you're removing sandbars, gravel bars, whatnot. So before you get in there and start removing things, make sure you're looking at the rules of what you can and can't do as far as that's concerned. I know universally there is an amount. I don't think most of our projects are ever going to exceed that threshold, but we also need to get that material out of the stream bank and out of the floodplain. And I think that's one of the really important things, that you just can't rearrange that necessarily within the stream. That needs to be taken out. And again, we have space here to work a little bit where we could put toe rock. We could go even higher. The other bank here doesn't look like it's extremely high. Again, just like Greg had said, it looks like maybe we do have some vegetation just past the gravel bars that may be impeding some of that floodplain flow for that water to be able to get to that side and dissipate the energy a little bit. I know in this case, we have some trees, it looks like, further downstream. I don't know what the condition of the bank is necessarily down there, but I'm guessing it might be a little bit better than around this curve here.
This looks like a good spot for just toe rock, Amy.
Like it does. It does. And when we went out there, toe rock is what we discussed with this landowner.
Yep.
The estimates I gave, I think, were a little higher than he anticipated, but that's going to be in the case of most of these that we see out here. It's definitely a good site for that. Again, another situation. This one's a little more challenging. This is actually on the South Fork Licking, much larger stream than the Walnut that we had seen in some of the prior pictures. This is actually one of them when we looked at the hard engineering that was fixed. This one was done a combination of toe rock and where we were higher rock in some places, if you remember that picture from before. We obviously had a lot of issues there. We have high velocities, a lot of flow. This one was in pretty bad shape. But again, we did have some space, although, you know, it's somebody's yard, to be able to slope those banks back to a more stable slope, be able to get some vegetation on that bank, and to be able to fix a situation like this. I think this one had some sort of grant money associated with it.
What did they do here, Amy, to fix it?
So this was a combination of, remember the weird picture we had that had the combination of toe rock and then the rock that went higher? I don't know if anyone remembers that picture, but we do have a photo of this one corrected. Look at it.
Okay. That looks like an expensive one.
That I think was a very expensive one.
Is that in the case studies PowerPoint?
No, that one was actually in the hard engineering one, I believe, there. So that is that same site afterward. Looks a lot different. You know, that was the one where they did the combination of high rock, toe rock. They obviously went high where they had some drainage patterns entering there.
Does it look like they have a row or two of trees maybe planted in that downstream stretch?
Yes, I think they had some green engineering involved in this one as well.
Yeah, it might be.
But the water's obviously pretty high in this one picture that we have that's finished. It would be nice to see a picture where maybe we didn't have the water so high at that point. Again, another one. This one's a little bit different. This is obviously on a large water body as well. We don't have necessarily the water or the gravel bars that we had in some of those others, but on our low bank, you can see we do have some vegetation. I don't know if I would consider that real bad and hurting too much of the floodplain. But in this instance, we have kind of like little noses sticking out where it's really, you know, we have those high velocity eddies or whatever that are going in little pockets and really cutting back. This is one I know we looked at in Holmes County to try to find a solution for. The farmer was obviously losing a lot of his farm field there in the bottom ground. You know, the challenge is this is obviously a big stream, high velocity. This is going to be a really expensive to fix. You can almost see where some of the high water goes if you look at the profile there on the bank. You know, it goes up there quite a ways. This is probably one where I'm going to recommend some sort of stone. We could do toe rock, but it's probably going to be a little higher than maybe what we think of for some of our smaller streams. Again, this is a farmer who did farm or was farming pretty close to the banks. We would recommend they're staying back a little bit, maybe putting a filter strip on there. I know that's really hard to do when this is your most productive field that you have.
This looks, Amy, like pretty silty, probably pretty erosive silts, I'm guessing.
This is a very silty, you know, Holmes County up there has a lot of silty ground, and this is something we see, and I forget, Karen can probably tell me which stream this is here.
If you look at it, Amy, I'm looking at the soil profile and how high up the bank those silts look wet, probably just that moisture wicking up.
High.
Yep, just wicking up into the silts, and then I'm sure they're highly erosive.
Right, so this is one we're going to do a little more than toe rock. We're going to go higher with the stone.
Yep, and it looks like a situation where anything they could do to get some vegetation or some cover back on that would prevent those, you know, erosive silts from being exposed all the time. You know what I mean? So
right,
kind of looks like where this big eddy is. Was there a tree there that might have got undercut and then fell over and took a big chunk of the bank out, perhaps?
And I think we do often have that situation. I know we have a couple slides here that are really going to show where we've had that situation. This becomes a little bit more of a challenge because oftentimes we're going to want to fill back into the stream because it's, you know, put such big chunks out of the stream. That always ends up being a full-blown permit when we do something like that because we're actually putting a lot more fill into the stream than if we just do toe rock.
Trevor said that it's the Killbuck.
The Killbuck, yes. Again, a much smaller stream here. You can see the same things kind of happening, right? Where our curves are our enemy here. It's really starting to cut back. It looks like we may have some room to be able to, you know, slope this back and be able to get a nice 2-to-1 or whatever. This is one I'd probably be tempted to do a little bit of fill just because it is kind of cutting back, you know, kind of in an odd shape there where it's not a very smooth curve. We obviously, again, have those sediment bars on the low bank side there that we might be able to clean out a little bit, maybe to redirect that normal flow.
You're right, Amy. All of these so far have been in the outside bins, right? Which is where we see 90% of the stream bank erosion, but all of them just look like cases where something has upset the equilibrium in that stream, right? So it's meandering more, trying to lengthen its path. So
Okay, Alyssa, you move to the next one. Again, same situation where that one curve is getting hit. And now this is one that this was in a park that I went to that kind of stumped me a little bit because we had this bank that was obviously eroded, but you can kind of see the little picture is downstream less than 100 feet and it's very stable. We have a lot of stone and whatever. So it's a very isolated little spot around the corner. Again, we have one area that had, a gravel bar on the one side. I'm not sure, just taking care of that gravel bar might not solve a lot of this issues, and maybe we don't need a lot out here.
doesn't look too extreme. You're right.
No. Next one. This is a good example, I think, of where, we have trees that have held the bank really good. But we've had, again, silty sediment there that has eroded. And again, in this case, we have a drainage pattern that you can kind of see in the front that's coming out. So that's a pretty big waterway coming in there that doesn't have an outlet structure that would probably benefit from some sort of structure. And I know this is Noble County here, and we had discussed that. I know not sure which way that landowner's going. Again, probably some sort of filter strip would be beneficial here. This is a tough one because we have those trees, obviously holding the bank in a portion. You can see that we've lost a lot of sediment on that one side. So that's always a hard call. Do we rip out those trees, that are kind of jutting out there and try to reestablish a slope? Or, in this case, I'm not sure we're going to really do a lot of filling in there. That would be difficult to do, I think. You got any advice on that?
Those trees look like another good storm or two, and they might be gone. I mean, they're so exposed that I'd say it's just a matter of time but before they go. But that one is a tough one, Amy.
It is a tough one. And, I love this picture because it's such a good example of what roots do to a bank and how it really holds, where those are and why, roots are so beneficial on banks. But again, those are probably ones that are going to need probably tore down because eventually they're going to create a log jam somewhere downstream here, which I think that's probably what's moving into my next pictures here. Or no, not yet. Okay, but still go on, Alyssa. Again, I like this picture. I know this may be not be from the best angle. It's kind of where we're kind of getting some head cutting that's going into a stream. It's going to cause some sediment issues here in the future. A good reason why maybe we are doing waterways and grade stabilization structures going into streams to make sure that we're not causing issues, in the future downstream.
Are those a couple of gabion baskets or fence or something down there in the stream?
I think it's just debris.
Well, it almost looks like woven wire or chain link fence or something on the
Yeah,
off
that
bank.
doesn't mean it's not.
Yeah. Somebody tried to put stone in there on their own and it was undersized.
And that's what a lot of people try to do. That's what we say, it's so important to size things correctly to make sure we have, the right size stone that's not going to disappear, or I can't tell if that might be some concrete there across the road, hoping that those aren't going to be floating away. Think about what we're putting in our streams. Okay, now this is a sad one to me. This is a stream that I have done some work on in the past. So this happened with one storm event. So where you can see that gravel bar on the right side of the screen, that's where the stream was. One large storm event came through here last year and deposited all that sand and gravel and some big stone in there too. And that same event also cut back. You can kind of see toward the left. It's going towards some buildings and some fence and some infrastructure there. Obviously, what needs done is some of that stone and gravel needs to be removed here. I think that's the plan of the city. I think that's their long-term plan to do that. And I'm going to guess do some stabilization where it's really cut back. You can see we have some fairly large trees leaning pretty good now. And again, that's going to be one we're going to end up having to probably fill a little bit there to be able to get our alignment correct again. So that's going to be one that's going to be some full-blown permits, I'm guessing, in the future.
Where's this one at?
This one is in Lancaster there. So the case study where we did the tow rock is downstream a little bit ways. It actually survived the storm quite well. So who knows, this may be a future project that we work on and we can make this some sort of training at some point.
It's interesting. If that happened in one storm, it makes you wonder why all of a sudden in one storm.
It was one of those, 4 or 5 inches that we had gotten really quick.
Yep.
This stream has it has a lot of slope. There's a big gradient on that stream. So the velocities get very high in certain places.
Yeah. Just makes you wonder why all of a sudden it dropped all that
It does.
gravel and sediment in one
really
storm
does.
there.
I mean, there's areas that have had little bits here and there, but I don't think I have seen anything like that. Again, another one, and we see this sometimes where instead of just off to the side, we get that deposited material in the center and we kind of braid around it. That always makes it challenging because we end up sometimes with bank erosion on both sides. Obviously, we can see on the right side there is where the majority of the erosion's happening. Doesn't look quite too bad there on the other side. Again, this is a situation where I would probably make sure that I'm removing some of that gravel there so we don't continue that braiding motion. That's going to become an issue here soon, and then we're going to have some of those trees probably falling in. But that said, once we remove some of that gravel and stone there, this is a situation where we don't look like we have too high of banks, and we can probably slope those back to a stable slope and either with tow rock, more than likely out here. Okay, we can move forward. Okay, another situation where we have a small little gravel bar right at the curve there. Although it doesn't look like I would say we have real high velocity type water, just because I'm looking at some of those vegetation that's around that corner. Again, we don't really have, I'm going to say, much of an erosion issue there as far as the bank, just because I think our velocities are very low, but that's a situation where our stream channel is getting very narrow. I think it's just getting ready to go around the corner there, and it might benefit from removing some of that sand and gravel that we have piled up.
It's like a spot, Amy, where there's livestock that might be
Yes.
spending a lot of time in that pool, perhaps.
And they could be, and that could be part of our issue too. And I have
Yep.
some good ones, I think, with livestock, further down here on a few other pictures. Okay, I'm going to let you talk about this one, Greg, because I think is this an EWP one that you had?
It's in Area 3, Greg. It's Center Bend Bridge.
That's what I kind of thought it might have been, Jessica. Maybe you want to, I've been to this site, but you've been there a whole lot more recently than me, if you want to help me.
Yeah, I can. This stream has really moved. If you look back through aerial photograph history, the stream bank used to be out almost to the center of the bridge, at least the first pilings that are on the bridge. The stream, went under the center of the bridge, and the stream bank was out maybe a third to a half of the span of the bridge. And so it's really eroded over time, but there was an event in 2019 that caused this major erosion around the bank, and the county tried to stabilize it with really large pieces of concrete that still have riprap or that still have rebar in them. So the plan for this is to clear out some of the sand and gravel that has been deposited with that storm, line the banks with riprap, but install grouted riprap before around this bend because the velocities are really high. So that project should be constructed next year.
So so this one is EWP.
Yes.
As Jessica mentioned, looks like, I'm assuming, Jessica, we're taking all that debris out too, right? Taking all the log jams and all that out. That with that bridge there, they could be a real problem. So.
Yes, there's some logs, even in the spring photos, that were still around that abutment, and removing the excess, like the concrete material
Yep.
that isn't suitable. Yeah, it will be an interesting project. The county engineer is concerned about the amount of stream, the amount of I guess the velocity that comes around the bend, but we did an analysis and it have sized it suitably, and then with grouting it will add an extra layer of protection. Oh, okay. I'm not familiar with this site, but it looks like there's a lot of erosion and scouring around that the bridge support. I'm not sure what the solution would be here, but probably just rebuilding that embankment around the bridge supports to keep scour from undermining the structure.
I wonder if those wood piers pilings aren't part of an old bridge foundation. So
Yeah.
this area has probably been disturbed multiple times, I'm guessing.
Does look like it.
Yeah, I think these are Kevin Lewis photos.
I'm not familiar with this one either, Amy, to be honest.
Yeah, obviously, whenever we have some sort of pillars, whatever in our stream, we're always going to have some issues. Oftentimes, that's going to result in a lot of sedimentation coming out and things that we're going to have maintained there.
Debris catchers.
Yes.
This project was in Area 3 in Belmont County, and it was recently completed. I believe this was in Belmont County, where they cleared out excess gravel in the channel. They could not work under the railroad trestle, but they were able to stabilize the slope around the utility pole by completing a combination of riprap and then grouted riprap.
This one was a tough one, Jessica, right? Because of all the, you got multiple bridges there, and there's a road just to the left.
Really difficult. I think they had overhead clearance issues with the utility line, and then of course they couldn't work within the railroad right of way. At a culvert downstream to clear out. It looks wide open in this picture, but I think it was a pretty constricted work zone.
This was another EWP one.
This is the Preble County Historical Society property, and they received a funding from NRCS to complete a stream improvements project here, and there's 500 feet of stream improvements around the bend, and they opted for riprap along the toe and then sloping back the bank and installing live stakes and some plantings. There's also going to be some clearing in the stream, although it's minimum, and they do have to take out the log jam.
Again, this is kind of a situation where we have a lot of log jams. I know with all of the ash trees coming down, this is a pretty typical situation that I feel like we have everywhere. I know all of you guys always get the call, are there log jam funds? And we always have to, in most cases, say, no, there's not. But everybody remembers when there was a lot of money in that program, the late 1990s, early 2000s. I don't think we can stress enough how important it is to keep your stream clear of trees that fall in, and how that really helps your stream bank of not having debris fall out and not making the water, rechannelize itself to get around some of these log jams that we have here. I guess that's what I have to say about that. I know some people have been creative to be able to find some log jam funds. I know Muskingum Watershed has some funds available if you're in that watershed, and some various soil and waters, I think, over the years have been able to find some funding mechanisms, for some localized areas to be able to address some of our issues. But for most of the state, I know it is an issue. Okay, so this is the next one. So this is the Little Rush Creek. I know this is kind of similar to one. This reminds me a little bit in a way of the one we have there on the Killbuck in Holmes County with the issue where obviously we have some log jam issues. We've had enough sedimentation erode back that now we're exposing some of those old oil lines through there, which is obviously an issue. But we've ended up, just because of some of the log jams and some of the debris issues, we've ended up with a lot of eddies down there that have really had a lot of swirling action and have cut back a lot. So when we do some work on this area here, we're probably going to have to do a little bit of realignment and some filling back through there. Obviously going to be expensive and require some significant permits. You're not going to get some nationwide for some of these issues here. Again, we have some farming that's kind of close to this, and we also border a levee around this area, so there's a lot of things to think about. I know this is on the Rush Creek Conservancy's radar as they're monitoring this. I think we're looking for some funds, aren't we, Greg, at some point to maybe address this issue and a few others in this area here. But then again, I think if we do some fill, you know, some toe rock or whatever might be the answer here. I think a lot of those oil lines can probably be removed. I think a lot of those are dead through there. As long as we don't have any live ones, we probably don't have to worry about shear walls or anything.
I know about some of the stuff in the Rush Creek, Amy. I'm not familiar with this particular site. It kind of looks like a nasty one. I think the first thing, if I were them, I would try to do would be to pull some of that debris back and try to, you know, either get it out of there or anchor it back into this spot to maybe help protect it.
So it has removed. That was my
so.
step one for them, is to get in there and remove the log jams. And I do believe the Conservancy District did do that and got all that stuff out of there, but we're still left, you know, with these banks that are pretty severe in this area and a lot of exposed pipeline. This is, you probably know where this is. This is close to where the Little Rush Creek enters the Big Rush Creek there at the edge of town in Bremen, close to the levee. So I think this is a common issue that we have too. So we're getting away from our curves a little bit, where we have, you know, farm crossings or driveway crossings where we have a large culvert. You know, in Southern Ohio, many of these culverts, you know, they're on a pretty good gradient. They have a large velocity coming out. We don't always have a lot of protection, you know, like some head wall or something. That's something we need to encourage people to do, because we end up getting, you know, these eddies and plunge pools that continue to grow. We can see that we're getting, you know, a lot of erosion there on the right side. A lot of that could be, I think, solved by just making sure that our outlet conditions at the bottom of the culvert are addressed correctly.
Yeah, so this one is a little odd. It's in a cemetery. So we're kind of restricted on space here, and we're also on bedrock. You can kind of see the shale and sandstone bedrock there. So the main issue is this culvert here, and I think we recommended that be replaced and enlarged in you know, a head wall type plunge pool type situation, you know, whether that be concrete or riprap. The issue with riprap, though, like I said, it's on bedrock, so there's pretty high gradient on the stream. There's lots of velocity, so I'm worried that you can kind of see some of that bigger rock that's being moved around. Placing any sort of riprap just on top of bedrock is going to be an issue. So I think we're leaning towards concrete. I don't know where they ended up with this project. They were going to go in-house funding for it.
Yeah, just a good example of why we need downstream head walls of protection at the bottom, you know, of some of these. And shale's always a challenging thing, because a lot of people see shale and they see stone and they think something that could be very stable, and it's not always that way, because it does, you know, compact and crush and fall apart there. And I think I agree that, you know, placing riprap is not the answer in this case, and you probably do have to go to a concrete out there. Okay, this comes pretty typical here. You know, we have a stream. I don't know if I would consider it horrible, but it's obviously going to be cutting into somebody's driveway. And, you know, it's Fairfield County, and they have so many flag lots. Another reason never to have a flag lot where your driveway is dependent, you know, such a small strip there. But this is a situation where we don't necessarily have the space to be able to slope that back at a 2-to-1 side slope that would be stable here without, encroaching on our driveway. I know where the pine trees are there are not this person's property, which makes it a little more challenging yet. This is where we may have to do more of a wall type situation, whether that's gabion baskets, pilings, whatever, because we just don't have a lot of space to work with, even though I wouldn't consider, this bank horrible. But it's obviously going to be an issue for this landowner out here. Same difference. I know this is one of your EWPs, I believe, Greg.
Yep, this is a EWP site that was fixed a few years back. In Jackson County, we had a water line there. You can see the blue marks. We have a utility pole that was compromised, and the roadway in jeopardy too. This site gets underwater pretty frequently. Big wide floodplain here, next to a 4-H camp. So the township definitely wanted to fix this. We ended up, the contractor put in a couple culverts, and we actually went over and borrowed some material off the left bank, some sediment, and brought it back across and built that bank back around the utility pole, and then rock riprap this. And this is one now that's aged in so well you can't even tell that there's riprap there now, and it's very stable. So Amy, Matt had asked in the chat about the parameters for EWP again, so real quick I'll just touch on those. So with EWP, you have to have a sudden watershed impairment, damage caused by a single storm or a closely grouped series of storms. You have to have damage to or a threat to life and high value property. So typically those are roads or utilities. And if you have all those criteria to make the site eligible, then we have to have a sponsor. And the sponsor has to be some sort of a public entity like a township, which it was in this case, or a county engineer, or a public utility. Sometimes we'll work with sewer districts, that type of thing, that has to sign up and agree to undertake, their share of the cost, typically 25%, and then do maintenance on the site after it's fixed. So that's the real quick rundown of what creates an EWP site. So this site was the only access in and out for a home or two. There's a 4-H camp just upstream, and so this was also downstream, excuse me, but this is also access in for that 4-H camp. So there was a lot of reasons why the township wanted to get this one fixed. So given the date and timestamp here, I think I recognize this site. I believe this is in Gallia County on Raccoon Creek, so a really, really big watershed. This is a site that we still need to fix, but it's about 25 or 30 feet from the road down to the stream here. So a really tall site, really tough one to fix. You can see it's more of those silts that are highly erosive. The plan here, this is an EWP site. The plan here is to do sheet piling, where we can set a crane on the road and vibrate in piling. Don't have any bedrock issues. We're out in the middle of a big wide floodplain here. So that's the plan. This is our one of two left in area 5 that we have to fix EWP sites, but that's the plan here. I just upstream it. The erosion's much worse if I'm at the right site here. So.
Okay, this is one that Jessica gave me, and I like this one. I know it's not from anywhere near here, but I think there's a lot to talk about here. So Jessica, you want to do this one?
Sure. This photo was taken from Spokane, and it was a watershed that is larger than, I think it was larger than what NRCS would usually deal with, and I don't remember the size of the watershed, but there's I believe there's a housing development and a cemetery on the upper bank, just not shown in the picture, but it's upstream of a gauging station and 2 bridges. So there's a lot of just erosion, and there's birds nesting there's swallows nesting in the hillside as well. Logan can jump in too if he'd like to add anything about this site.
Yeah, we were just, when we were out on site, I mean, you get out there and you take a first look at it and you're like, this site is, horrendous. This is like way unsafe to be at this park. And it's every bit of 30, 40, 50 feet tall in some places. But like, a thing that they kind of kept pushing to us is, when you're out there, take a minute and just like take it in, kind of observe and just don't really think, just, look at what you're seeing and then kind of think what questions you need to be asking yourself. So later we went back to the class and kind of looked at some historical photos, and you look at it and really, like the bank hasn't moved in like the last 20 years. So is it really that big of a concern? Like, it looks really bad when you're out there. But is it actively eroding? Maybe not. We're starting to get some revegetation along the toe there. Looks like we have some rock kind of protecting the toe, just that's been deposited. And it really wasn't as bad of a site as, when you're first out there and looking at it.
I mean, my initial reaction is this would be something that could benefit maybe from hydro seeding or something, of just getting, something green on that bank. Or does the nesting cause issues there?
I think the nesting was pretty concentrated in one area, so hydro seeding would be a good option. And I don't remember if it was the city or the park, but they had to the right, not in the picture, but had cleared out like a secondary channel for flooding events. So they had completed some work on the stream.
Okay, now this one's a slightly different situation. We talked about, banks eroding, but I know in Eastern Ohio, we also have the issue where we have slippage, where it's not necessarily just our stream banks going, but we have slippage from upstream that also causes issues. That becomes more of a geology issue sometimes, I think. And, how do we stabilize that slippage and make sure that we secure that so it doesn't become an issue? This was obviously upstream of a very high bank there. So the bank itself further down did not have the issue per se as it just did in that one section there. I'm going to say some slippage things are probably a little beyond my expertise. So this is a good opportunity where I think you have a soil scientist or somebody coming in and helping you make some decisions on what you can do when we have, slip prone type soils.
Amy, I'll maybe just throw a couple comments in on slips. So some of our old retired engineers, and Keith Rao, who we talked about last week, might have been one of them, but I had been told several times that, and we have a lot of slip prone soils, but they basically said, if you have a slip, you typically have three things going on. It's the 3 S's. You either have bad soils, you have steep slope, and you have saturation. So the 3 S's, and oftentimes you'll have all three of those things going on, or maybe two of the three. But what I was always told is to fix a slip and keep it from getting worse or happening again, you typically have to remove two of those three factors. So, get rid of the slope, flatten it, get rid of the saturation somehow, or remove enough of that soil that you can put something else back that's going to stabilize the site. So remove two of the three factors. I don't know if that's always true, Amy, but that was an old rule of thumb that I'd been given. So.
And that's probably a good rule of thumb, although, just like stabilization, whatever, that's very expensive too.
Yep.
Sometimes if we have a springer or something, we're good at draining springs. That's something that we can do if we have the right situation. To be able to do such a thing like that. But when you start removing soils and replacing it with different material, that becomes very, very expensive.
So did they have somewhere like at the top of the slope here, it almost looks like a yard? Did they maybe have water or like downspouts or something that were outletting here and might have, saturated this area on the hillside? Or
right, and that could be too, and something that probably needs further investigated out there. But
yep. Did they fix this, Amy?
Not that I know of. And this is one I have not been out on.
Oh, okay. I figured you were there with Nikki on that.
I was not. I have been on most of those, but this was one that I did not go out to. This is a more recent one here. So I at some point I may be out on this. This is one that they wanted me to come out on, and I know the landowner thought he had an awful situation. Honestly, I told him I thought his banks looked pretty good. I wasn't overly concerned. We had trees, they weren't falling in. We have some stone on the banks. Yes, we don't have a lot of vegetation, but to me, they weren't eroding back too well. I thought a little bit more of a filter strip would probably benefit greatly out here, but in general, I wasn't concerned with this guy's bank, and told him I don't think he has a real issue. Not everybody that thinks they have a problem necessarily has a problem, and don't feel, that you can't tell somebody that. I don't think this guy's going to have, a lot of issues in the future. I know he thinks he has, some roots being exposed there, and he does a little bit, but it's not what I would call excessive. And to actually rip out all that vegetation, slope back the bank, and put tow rock room there, it's going to be very expensive, and I'm not sure it's going to be worth it.
Amy, are you looking at the chat?
I saw Danny sent us something.
Yeah, she asked if what would you recommend for a filter strip here? Something that's 30 feet wide, or what would you do?
So typically we're going to push everybody toward a CRP or some sort of government filter strip. I think most of them are a minimum of at least 20 that you have to get any sort of government cost share funding. So I'm probably always going to steer people that direction, so at least they can get a little bit of money toward it. I like at least a 20-foot filter strip in most cases. If we do eat back on some of these places, if it's too narrow, I'm not sure it's doing much good. Let's get a nice buffer on these. I think there's even filter strips that can go up to 50 feet, isn't it, through CRP? Most people are never going to give you that much. And I'm not sure it's always necessary.
In CREP, they're even wider than that. But the thing with those, if you're signing them up, they got to have cropping history. So
they do. And this one looks like it has, we don't have much of a buffer. We're farming, looks like we have bean residue there, and we're farming pretty close. So this one I'm sure has some cropping history. I want a little bit of buffer. We don't need to take up the whole field. I don't think that's necessary. And again, these are always very productive. The good black soils that people are getting well over 200 bushel per acre corn on it, and they're never going to give you much of a filter strip. Again, another one, I'm not sure I would say this is horrible, not a real high bank. We're obviously getting some shear on that left side there. You can see maybe we have a bit of a stone gravel bar there to the right. Again, this is one that probably you could do a little bit of tow rock, would do a lot of good here. We obviously have some space there to slope it back to a stable slope. Pretty straightforward, I think, tow rock sort of project here. Again, also kind of typical. You can see we have some pretty silty stuff here. Not a lot of gravel. Again, looks like we have a good leaner there off to the side. Probably needs removed. Again, we might be able to get some tow rock in there. I don't know how high we're going to have to go. You can kind of see a little bit what's saturated there in the soil profile. Again, I think this is one, probably some sort of tow rock. We could even do maybe something a little green out here. I don't think we look like we have, high velocities necessarily.
Amy, are you familiar with this one?
I think this is one Kevin gave me.
I was guessing the same thing. I think this is a site in Gallia County. I've not been to it, but I remember the picture, and you can kind of see the low area behind the bank to the left. That's an access road, and I think this guy had signed up for an equipped stream crossing just downstream of that big tree. So that further kind of complicated things. I was never out here. I don't think they ended up doing much to fix the bank here, Amy, but I agree with everything you said about how you might go about it. So. Right.
And how critical is this? I mean, this isn't like crop. This looks like it's through a fairly wooded area. If we have an access road, maybe this is pasture-ish.
It was pasture to the left, and he had a big hay field to the right, if I remember. So, yeah, is it worth spending a boatload of money for what you're protecting.
I'm going to probably say this one is the one that's probably not worth fixing unless it's a lot worse somewhere other than what we're seeing.
I don't think they've ended up doing anything here. I'd have to go back and look if they even built the stream crossing, to be honest. So
Again, another one that I didn't think was overly bad. Obviously, we have a bridge abutment there that they've looked like they've put some stone, or that looks like maybe concrete there, probably by the township or whatever. Again, I wouldn't consider this one necessarily horrible. We do have some stone and sand, gravelly areas that looks like getting exposed there. Maybe we have some utilities that may be an issue. I think the biggest complaint here was if you look further down toward that house on the left-hand bank, that they're concerned about it going around the curve there. Again, this is one where we could probably put some tow rock here and solve this issue fairly easily because we don't have high banks or anything, and I don't think this would be all that expensive of a fix out here. Again, I know I love this picture. I know Melissa cringes probably when she sees this, but what do you do when you have streams like this? Are you going to fix them? And I'm probably going to look at this and I'm probably going to say most instances, probably not. I know what every farmer wants to do to that, which we don't want them to do, but I can tell you every farmer that's ever had one that's been this sinuous and trying to find its, happy equilibrium wants to take a big piece of machinery and put one big long straight section through that, which would definitely be an Army Corps no-no. But this is hard because you can't stabilize that whole sinuous section of stream all the way through there. In the next slide after this, well, go ahead and go to the next slide after this because it's going to be very similar in situation here. My advice when you have something like this is if there's livestock in there, make sure that we're getting that livestock out of there. They're obviously making the issue a lot worse. It's trying to find its equilibrium, and I don't think we can fight all of those tight, sinuous curves there. If there's a spot that we're trying to do a crossing or something where we need to get across it, maybe that's a small area that we try to stabilize a little bit, but we can't afford to fix this.
no, I generally agree. Situation like that, yeah, you've got some bank erosion. The stream's just adjusting to changes of some sort, but it doesn't look too bad to me.
Some government program, some government program's going to give you some fence for this.
Yep.
This is one that to me they don't really have much of an issue. I think this is probably just a reminder to a lot of people where you do have a tile outlet. We need some stone or something there so we don't end up with plunge pools. We don't end up with cutting back. And this off situation where the landowner, they see it as an issue, but in the big scheme of things, it's just a little bit of stabilization right there around pipe outlets.
Putnam County asked about some rock checks to slow the water down through here.
I'm not sure we have a lot of velocity here. In this particular one, I think we're in a relatively flat area. Maybe you could do some in-stream, restoration to, if our velocity issues are high. I have not calculated the velocities at this site here. Obviously, this whole area looks like a pretty good floodplain, so the water is obviously getting out and has places to go. These tight bends, they're a challenge. And I'm not sure what we can really do with these to get them to work the way we need them to be. Obviously, if we straighten this, our velocity would really increase, and it would just end up with a lot of issues downstream. I don't know. It's just fighting for its happy little shape, I think.
I'm not sure what the rock checks might look like that would do any good. We talked about weirs, different types of bendway weirs and stuff, and those can have a positive impact. I don't know that this stream's big enough to really do weirs. Okay, dams in the ditch. That I would think that if you put in rock checks or dams that were big enough to slow the water down in the type of flows that are reforming these banks, that when the water spills over those, I would be worried about negative changes that you might create in the stream with, areas where the water's plunging over those dams and stuff like that, would be my thought, Amy. I
Yeah.
don't know if you want to add to that, but if you think about, like the weirs, those are typically not blocking the whole stream, and they're oriented such that they just divert not the huge rain events away from the bank, but what they'd call the channel forming flow. So base flow and flows that are, a little bit above that, but before you get to bank full. But again, on streams big enough where you can put them in and have a positive impact without blocking the entire channel section. So I don't know anything about these, Amy, and I looked up Okeana. That says it's Butler County. So I'm not sure where you got these. It clearly looks to me like you have bedrock here. And I'm assuming that's bedrock and not just a grouted stream bottom.
I don't know. I was almost thinking that looked like concrete. I forget who did give me this one.
I think Steve gave you the Okeana ones.
Is Steve on here?
Looks like here you've got a big plunge pool for sure, and a head cut, a hydraulic jump happening that's going to keep undercutting this and probably working its way upstream, would be my guess, Amy.
Yeah, and yeah, that definitely looks like it's a concern. And I don't know if we maybe have two streams merging here. Obviously, this concrete was put here to stabilize those pillars there for that newer looking bridge. We obviously just didn't think of what was going to happen directly downstream of that, where we obviously have an issue that looks like it's pretty undercut at this point. And it's definitely going to be a problem here in the future. I guess this is a challenge what you do, whether you try to make that maybe more of a weir or more control it a little bit more. I guess we'd probably want to investigate that a little more to see what the situation actually is kind of underneath that concrete there.
Chris Hall is in the chat and he said that it's Buck Run, and on the Dry Fork, folks are looking at Fish Passage.
I've been here with Butler County Soil and Water, and I'm with Hamilton County, and they're working on a grant program to do something with the hardened bottom of that bridge or the stream crossing. And it's lots of challenges because the road's hardened all the way up and down on either side of it against the larger Dry Fork. And there's some erosion there, but mostly it's just hard. And there's no way the fish can get up there. And that's what they're looking at. But it's an ODOT challenge more than anything else.
So are they concerned about where we're having, I guess, at the edge there?
Yes. And so to unharden that to make it fish passageable. So, and then that's where the ODOT problem becomes, because the piers on the bridge are not deep enough to remove what they put underneath the bridge in order to slope it so that fish could come up it.
So I'm assuming they put some of that concrete and everything there because they had pier issues in the first place.
I think it's just what they do.
Oh, okay. I don't see that in Southern Ohio. So, well, obviously it's an ODOT challenge.
We haven't talked much about the fish passage issue, Amy. And historically, maybe in Ohio, it wasn't something that we worried about much. But I do think it is something that we ought to be aware of and thinking about with any solutions that we propose, for sure.
This is the Soil and Water in Licking County had me come out to this site here a couple years ago. Kind of hard to believe this is around the Buckeye Lake area because this is not a landscape that you would think of in Central Ohio here. I don't know if we call this a low-head dam, even though it looks somewhat natural. I know at some point we had some concrete poured here. It's obviously breaking down, causing some issues. You can see we have some incredible velocities here at this site. This is going to be one that I'm probably refer to some private engineering who specializes in stream restoration or whatever to probably address this. You know, this is probably a good example. We talk about, you know, fish not having, you know, the ability to be able to go upstream. This is a good situation where that's going to be the same. But again, we have very high velocities that we're dealing with here, and maybe this is a good low head dam removal project for the future in that area here. Well, I think that was our last slide. Hopefully people found our Streambank INE useful.